Hello and welcome back to my small corner of YouTube. Have you ever heard the word Luddite before? Because it's one of those words that feels like it should be obvious, like it should sit in bold in the Yorkshire dictionary if there were ever such a thing. But outside of this part of the country, it's often not that well known at all. Yet, in the early 1800s, it was a word that could send shivers through entire communities, because the Luddites were not just a passing moment in history. The event connected to them caused real fear, real violence and real change in the lives of ordinary working people across Yorkshire and beyond. And what makes it even more striking is that all of this was unfolding in the same landscape where young Patrick Brontë was living and working as a clergyman. He saw these events firsthand. He lived through the tension in the parish, and it's even thought that he later spoke about these experiences to his children long after the events themselves had passed. So when we think about the Brontës' world, we're not just thinking about moors and novels and imagination. We're also looking at a very real, very unsettled part of local history that shaped the entire environment they grew up in. There is even a possible thread that connects this atmosphere to Charlotte Brontë's novel Shirley, which explores industrial unrest and workers struggling in a fictional form, drawing on the same kind of tensions that were present in Yorkshire at the time. So in this video, we are going to start very simply. What were the Luddites, and why did they appear in places like West Yorkshire? And how close did all of this come to the Brontë family themselves? So, where are you today, Kate? I hear you all saying this is not my usual leather chair. No, I'm at a friend's house today in her beautiful townhouse. It's one of those tall, thin houses on lots of floors. And I found a small corner to come and talk to you, a bit of peace and quiet. And I brought my brew, but there isn't much left now, I'm afraid. I've guzzled most of it. And yeah, I've been sat here and I thought this is the perfect place to sit and just catch up. The sun keeps going in and out because it's very windy today and the clouds keep moving. So yeah, the consistency of lighting will be completely off, but hey, it's not about that, is it? So anyway, thank you for watching this today. I've got some news to tell you at the end. Bit of catch up on things that are happening, things that are going to happen, and a few little changes. So stick around for that because yeah, I've kind of been saving it all up for you. So, first of all, what is a Luddite? So, the Luddite movement was made up largely of working people in textile areas of England who were reacting to massive changes in how cloth was being produced at the start of the 19th century. And it's important to say straight away, they were not simply people who hated machines. I mean, that is just the version that often gets repeated, but it's far too simple because machines were not new in the textile industry. What was changing was the type of machines being introduced and the speed and the scale at which these could replace skilled human labour. Because in early textile work, much of the production still depended on these skilled workers, people who trained, they've been apprentices, they understood the process and they produced that high quality cloth. But the new machinery being introduced in mills could do part of that work faster, more cheaply, and often with fewer skilled hands involved at all. So the fear was not just about machines existing, it was about what these new machines actually meant. They represented a shift where skill was becoming less important and wages were being driven down and long established ways of earning a living were starting to disappear. And this is where it becomes really important to understand the wider community impact. Because in these textile towns and villages, the mills were not just a workplace for this small group of people. It often supported entire communities. We've got whole families were dependent on it. Shopkeepers relied on the workers spending their wages locally. Got doctors, innkeepers, tradesmen, everyone in the village economy was connected to whether the mill was doing well or whether people were in work. So when wages were cut or when machines reduced the need for workers, it didn't just affect one group of people. It rippled across the whole community. And at the same time, there were wider pressures building across the country. The war with France was disturbing trade in markets, and this made the textile industry even more unstable. Work became less secure and wages in many areas fell further. And in places like West Yorkshire, this combination of these falling wages and unstable work and rising food prices created very real hardship. And for some families, it was no longer just about poor conditions, but about whether they could actually afford enough food to get through the week. And out of this pressure, some groups began to meet in secret. They organised targeted attacks on the machinery they believed were directly responsible for their situation. The idea was not random destruction. The machines they targeted were those used in the most visible changes to their work. Machines that were seen as replacing their skilled labour and reducing their wages. And in their eyes, removing or at least damaging these machines was a way of sort of protecting their livelihood, or at least resisting the change that felt unstoppable. This is where the name Luddite comes from, because it's linked to the figure of Ned Ludd. He is described as a semi-legendary figure because there is no solid historical evidence that he was a real identifiable person in the way that we might think a leader is today. Instead, he almost became this sort of symbolic name used by different groups to represent the movement itself. A kind of shared identity rather than a single organised leader. So when people spoke about the Luddites, they were not talking about one structured organisation with one clear leader. They were talking about a wider, loosely connected movement of people responding in a very different way to the same economic pressures. In the West Riding of Yorkshire, including areas around Huddersfield and the surrounding villages, these tensions became very visible very quickly. This was not something happening somewhere far away in factories that people never saw. It was happening in the same landscape where people lived, worked, worshipped and walked every day. And it's worth being clear here about why places like Huddersfield mattered in this story. At the time, Patrick Brontë was living and working in nearby parishes such as Hartshead, which meant he was right in the middle of this wider industrial and social landscape, not isolated from it in Haworth as we sort of assume when we think of the Brontë family, because of course that's where they lived later on. And what makes this period particularly important is the way work itself was changing. This meant that cloth production was done at home or in a small workshop, and often involving whole families just working together. People would spin, weave or prepare the materials in their own homes and then sell or supply their work to a wider system. But as larger mechanised mills developed, more and more of the work was brought into factory settings. The machines, they could produce cloth faster and in a greater quantity, which meant that industrial hand workers were increasingly pushed out of the system or forced to accept much lower pay. This shift didn't just affect the workers directly employed in the mill, it also affected those cottage workers and who had relied upon home-based spinning or weaving for many, many years. Because as demand changed, their work became less regular, less valued, and in many cases no longer suitable. So entire households could find themselves affected, even if they were not physically sort of working inside the factory mills themselves. At the same time, unemployment began to rise sharply, and even those still in work often found their wages being reduced. I mean, this created a situation where insecurity became part of daily life. So, in response to this growing poverty, local parishes relied heavily on something called poor relief. And this was a system where money was raised through local taxes on properties, known as poor rate, and then it was used to provide basic support for those who had no other means of survival. In particular, this might mean food, fuel, or clothing, or even just a small financial assistance. It was not a generous support, and it was never intended to replace wages. It was more of a sort of a last resort system to prevent complete destitution. By 1912, things had become so severe in parts of West Riding that parishes were having to sort of raise the poor relief several times a year just to keep up with demand. And even then, it often wasn't enough. At the same time, the price of basic food like bread raised dramatically, which made the situation even more difficult. So people were caught in a very narrow space. Low or unstable income on one side, and then of course the essential living costs on the other. So when Luddite activity began to appear in this region, it didn't come out of nowhere. It grew directly out of this pressure. It was a response to a world where work was disappearing, communities were under strain, and the normal structures that supported everyday life were just starting to break down. And because of all of this, West Yorkshire became one of the main centres of Luddite activity, with events unfolding across the very same landscape where our Patrick Brontë, the clergyman, was living and working at the time. I need a cup of tea, another one. I dread to think how many cups I've had today. But tea is a big part of my life. I do like a brew, but I don't drink or smoke or do anything like that. So, hey, if tea is my only vice, then that's fine by me. But, I do like a cup of tea. So I've been asked by one or two people about, have something called a Ko-fi account or a Ko-fi, Ko-fi account. And basically what it is, it's somewhere where you can go and you can donate the price of a cup of tea or coffee, but in my case tea, to myself. And I haven't put the little information up on screen for a while, and someone was asking me about it the other day, but I also do have a description in my... No, I don't have a description in my link. I have a link in my description. So if you want to donate me the cost of a cup of tea, you can do it via my Ko-fi coffee account. So thank you. Please don't feel I'm asking. If you want to, that's absolutely fine, but I do not expect it. All I will ask from you if you watch my video is to do a like, a subscribe, tell your friends, share it. All the things that cost you nothing, they mean a lot to me. And the hypey button thing, which I forget I have all the time. So by this point, Patrick Brontë was living and working in the area as a clergyman, like we said, and he was spending time in nearby parishes and villages, and he wasn't far from where he later ended up in Haworth. And I think this is where the story really shifts, because we're no longer looking at something far away in the distance or in the newspaper. These events were unfolding across the same moorland routes and the same villages and the same connected landscape that people were moving through every day. And it is worth saying that fear in the area was becoming so very real. I mean, this isn't just talk or rumours. There were incidents taking place across textile districts, and people were aware that groups were moving around at night through the countryside and attacks could happen at any time. One of the most significant of these events was the attack on Rawfolds Mill near Cleckheaton, close to Hart's Head Moor. The mill was owned by William Cartwright, a manufacturer who'd introduced new machinery and was very strongly associated with the new mechanised system of production. In the climate of the time, that made him a very visible figure in a very divided situation. But what is really important here is not just the mill owner, it's the atmosphere around it all, because this was not experienced as something contained inside a mill. It felt like something that could spill out into everyday life. There were small communities where people were sort of closely connected. So if there were violence at a mill, it didn't feel remote, it felt very close to home. In response to this growing tension, a large group gathered in the area and moved towards the mill at night. Accounts describe a very organised group, divided into roles, with some carrying firearms, others with tools like hammers and axes. And they crossed the moorland in the dark and approached the building together, almost like a mob. And what followed was a violent confrontation. The mill had been prepared and they were defending from the inside, and shots were fired as the attack began. Windows were broken and there was repeated attempts to force entry. In the end, the attack failed and several of those involved were killed or badly injured. I mean, afterwards, the impact of what happened really spread quickly through the surrounding villages, including places within Patrick Bronte's parish. And this is where the emotional weight of it really sits, because it wasn't just the event itself. It was the sense of what might come next. Fear of retaliation, fear of further attacks, and a feeling that things were not fully under control. And in that atmosphere, even ordinary life would have felt difficult. Travelling between villages, walking at night, or living in more isolated places all carried a different sense of risk. And it's in this context that we hear the repeated account that Patrick Brontë kept a pistol by his bed at night, and that in the morning he would fire a shot out of the window rather than keep a loaded weapon in the house during the day. There is even local tradition that suggests marks in the stonework of the tower of the church may be linked to this practice, although that is part of oral history rather than something firmly documented. Whether every detail of that story can be pinned down precisely or not, what it does reflect is something very clear. If someone like Patrick Bronte's position felt the need to take precautions like that, it shows just how unsettling and uncertain the atmosphere in the area must have been. And that feeling of tension, once it took hold in a community like this, didn't simply disappear when the immediate event was over. Oh, I had to move. I've been sat on my foot. It's gone to sleep. That's the thing. I like sitting curled up, but my body doesn't like me doing it for too long. Oh, my foot has gone to sleep, and I've got a squeaky chair, so apologies for that. And the sun's just come out again. For how long? It's not like being on a warm bench in a garden today. The violence didn't continue indefinitely, but the tension in the area didn't simply just disappear either. In the months that followed, there were still incidents connected to the wider unrest, including further targeting of machinery and individuals linked to mill ownership. Eventually, the authorities responded more firmly, and a number of people were arrested and tried. Several were executed in connection with the wider Luddite disturbances across the region. But what is important here is not just the official ending of events, it's the atmosphere that remained behind. Because even when the most intense period of violence had passed, the feeling of instability didn't fully go away. In parts of the West Ridings, those nights were still remembered, still talked about, and still carried as part of local memory for years afterwards. And this is where it becomes especially relevant to Patrick Brontë and the world around him. Because these were not stories that existed only in his newspapers or official records. They were stories that were lived, repeated and passed on within the community like Hartshead and the surrounding villages. People would have known someone who'd been affected, or known someone who'd been there, or at the very least heard firsthand an account that stayed in circulation. Patrick Brontë himself is later associated with recounting these events, particularly the attack on Rawfolds Mill, and it's suggested that he would sometimes describe them in a very vivid way to those around him. Whether in conversation with friends or parishioners or within his very household, these were not distant historical events to him. They were part of lived memory. And so it's kind of not surprising that this atmosphere filtered into the Brontë household. The children were growing up in a landscape where industrial change was not abstract. It was part of everyday conversation. It was part of local experience. It was something that had affected neighbours and families and those whole communities. So when we think about Charlotte Brontë later writing about tension and unrest, particularly in Shirley, it's not just about her reading historical accounts or newspapers. It is also about the environment she grew up in, where stories of the Luddites and the mills and the fear of those years would have been part of background noise of childhood. These were stories told by a father who'd lived through that period, but also reinforced by communities that had experienced it collectively. And that's what makes this period so significant when we look at the Brontës. It's not just an historical event sitting outside their lives. It was part of the world that they were formed in. So even as the violence faded, its memory remained, and in a quiet way it helped shape the atmosphere that would later feed into some of the most powerful writing to come out in the 19th century. Oh, I feel like I'm sitting down to do the news. I can't quite believe it has been so long since I last sat down and gave you all a proper update on what is going on in my Brontë HQ. So I thought I'd take a few minutes just to share a bit of news with you all. So firstly, you will all be so pleased to know that my pottery man has been very busy again. Yay! And I have just taken a fresh delivery of ceramics. Yes! And it's not just the teapot and the teacup this time, but also the long-awaited Brontë mugs. You'll find that my online shop is now fully stocked again, ready for orders. But if you're new here and you don't know about this, I have a small shop filled with Brontë-inspired pieces that I've put together over the years. I'll put a link in the description if you want to have a look. I think the teapot and the teacups has kind of been one of my favourite from the beginning, so I always get really excited and pleased when they come back into stock and I get to open them up again. And as for the Brontë mugs, they've honestly been something else. I mean, you've all absolutely loved them from the first day they came out. I even gave my own Brontë mug to a friend who really wanted one when I'd sold out. And I think that probably tells you everything you need to know about how popular they were. I do ship worldwide, although I do have some issues with certain parts of the EU because of shipping rules. So if you're not sure if that's you, just drop me a message and I will check it out and we'll see what we can do. Very loud plane. I also need to mention, because of a few of you have been asking, the Anne Brontë beaded necklace is not going to be back in the shop for a little while. I'm sorry. The main reason for this is one of the key components I used to make them is no longer being produced, not here in the UK. So I'm currently trying to find a suitable replacement. I've been looking at different suppliers and other options, but so far I've not found the right match. I am still actively looking though, because I know how much everyone likes them. But at the moment, there's no clear timeline for when they're going to return. But I will keep you updated as soon as I know more. And I'm really sorry to anyone who's been waiting for them. Anyway, now the next thing I'm really excited about is something I've been thinking about for a while, and I am super excited. I'm doing a newsletter, but hold on. This is going to be called the Brontë Circle, and I want to be really clear. This is not going to be a corporate formal sign up for updates kind of newsletter. No. This is not what this is. This is going to be a community space as much as a newsletter. Yes, I will be sharing updates, but I will also be sharing the real bits in between. So that might be something I've been doing behind the scenes, a funny story from a visit somewhere, or something that has happened while I've been out and about working on Brontë related things. But it's also news, it's shop updates, it's things coming back into stock. It might be news from the brider. It might be news from the wider Brontë world, books coming out, events being announced, talks, festivals, exhibitions, anything like that that feels relevant and interesting. But what I really want this to be is something that people feel part of. So each month there will also be a space in the Brontë Circle for submissions. And this is the part that I am most excited about, because I want people to be able to share something of their own. This could be a poem, a short piece of writing, a short story, a reflection, some artwork, a book review, or even something like sharing thoughts about attending a talk or visiting a place connected to the Brontës. I don't want anything unkind, anything critical, or anything nasty, so I will be keeping an eye on it all, don't worry. This is not a place for arguing. It's meant to be a supportive, creative and an encouraging space for everyone. A space where people who love the Brontës and their writing can actually share what they do and feel like it's being seen. Because I will also be including a short bit about the person who submitted it, so we know whose work this is and who they are. Because you never know where that might lead. Someone else might read it, connect with it, and it might open a door for them. I mean, that is really what this is all about. It's about creating a space where we can actually share things directly with each other without relying on social media algorithms, or because they decide who they think should see what. Because sometimes it does feel like things just disappear into the background noise online. And I want this to be something more direct than that, something that lands in your inbox and you can read it when it suits you. It's going to come out hopefully once a month, and I'm still finalising the exact timing, but if you want to sign up, you will always be the first to know when it goes out. And I will also make sure it's shared more widely when each issue is released, so nobody is going to miss it. Your details will not be shared with anybody. There will be no selling, no spam, no contacting you out of the blue. This is simply for that newsletter. And if you want to submit something, please do, because I've made a separate email address, thebrontecircle@gmail.com. So even if you're someone who runs something small locally, or you're an author with a book coming out, or you have something connected to the Brontës that you think people might enjoy, you are more than welcome. Send it into that same email address I'll put in the description. It's meant to feel open and shared, not closed off. And in a way, it reminds me a little of how the letters would have worked in the Brontës family's time. I mean, they were sharing news through the written word, passing things between people who cared about similar ideas, just in the written form. And I think there is something really lovely about bringing that idea into something modern, but in a kind of simple way. And finally, just a small personal update, so there's no confusion going forward. Most of you will just know me as Kate, which is fine, and that's how I come across. But I'm no longer going to be using my married name of Benson. I am going to go back to my maiden name, which is Page. So going forward, you're going to know me as Kate Page again. And I have to say, I can't help but feel like the name Page fits rather well into everything I do here. So what with books and stories and the Brontës. A few things in my life has changed over the past few months, and it just feels like that this is the right moment to step into my new chapter, both personally and with everything that I'm building. Your support means everything, and it has done for the last few months. But please don't worry about me. I am doing okay, and I'm actually feeling really excited for what is ahead now, because there's lots coming together at the moment with the channel, the shop, and especially the Brontë Circle. And I will Probably start sharing a little bit more with you on that journey as things unfold, so sit tight. And who knows, I might even take you along for some of it on camera. Maybe even a moving house video. If you like the sound of that, let me know. So if you see the name Paige appear, it's still me. I've gone back to my roots. Everyone in that village economy, in the village economy, everyone in the village economy directly employed in the will. In the will? I need a sip of water. I suddenly feel really sleepy. I just had a cake before this, and I think after eating a nice sticky bun, having a cup of tea, and now curling up in a chair, my body's going, oh, let's have a little snooze. Mustn't go to sleep. It's not really the done thing at 3 in the afternoon. I better get on. Later writing about industrial tension and unrest. So when we look back over everything we've talked about today, the Luddites were not simply a footnote in history. They were a response to a world that was changing very quickly, where traditional work was disappearing, wages were falling, and whole communities were feeling the pressure of something they could not easily control. And in West Yorkshire, those pressures were not distant or abstract. They were right in the landscape, in the mills, in the villages, and in the daily lives of the people who lived through it. And in many ways, it all comes back to change and how unsettling it can feel when you think it might affect people's lives and the way that they survive. And it's something I think we can still recognise today. I know I can in my own way. Sometimes change feels uncomfortable, especially when it touches things that feels familiar or secure. But change is often inevitable, and even the machinery that caused so much fear at the time did not ultimately stop the wider course of industrial change. Things kept moving whether people really liked it or not, or if they were ready or not. And I think that is what makes this period so powerful to look back on. It's not just about machines or protests, it's about people trying to hold on to stability and then the world that was shifting underneath them. And in a quiet way, that same atmosphere sits in the background of the Brontës landscape as well. So thank you so much for watching. It means so much to me. And if you like this video, please do that whole likey, subscribey, hypey thing, because it really, really, really does help me out, and it lets YouTube know that we want to watch more Brontë content. Have a good weekend. Take care of yourself. I will see you all the Friday after next for more Brontë adventures. See you then. Bye bye.